Okay, let's talk about how this lid is going to be built. It's curved, obviously. The chest is curved, and I made these two pieces way early in the process because the arc of this is what defines the arc that on the ends of my chest. So I laid out first this drawing with 6 staves, and I didn't like it. I felt that, first of all, it was too balanced. 6 doesn't leave me anything in the middle here, and I want to highlight the middle stave. The stave's a little bit too wide. They're almost 3 inches, 2 and 15/16, 2 and 15/16. This stave is wider because it's wider along the bottom, but it shows the same, hopefully at the top, 2 and 15/16. So I said, okay, wrong tack there. Let's redraw it, and I redrew this one. That gets the staves down to 2 and 9/16 roughly. And what you're seeing is the red is where the mortises are. The little black is little splines that are going to go between them. And this is going to be 7 pieces, which I like because now I've got a nice piece in the middle, which I'm going to highlight with the inlay. So what I've done is I've gone and transferred this essentially into these mortises. These relate exactly to where they should be on the drawing. How did I get those mortises all cut? Well, I have marks on my drawing that showed that I was basically going to be tangential to each one of these mortises. So I made a little carriage that fits this piece, and it's turned against the mortiser, which goes in horizontally. And basically, each position cuts that mortise. And I was even able to do the end ones, which was more tricky, but I was able to do that. And they look like they're pretty good. I can adjust them a small amount if I need to. And one other subtle thing is I've cut deep mortises every other one. Those will have a nice like inch long tenon. And then there's a 3/8 inch tenon on the ones in between. They don't all need to be deep. I don't want to take all the strength out of those ends, these breadboard ends essentially that I'm building. So I had all the lines on this drawing showing me the miters between all the pieces, and it's all there. Just a question of translating it onto here and then doing it. So let's talk about the stock that I'm pulling it from. So in picking out the material for the staves, if you remember, I chose a 6-foot long cherry board. It's about 11 inches wide. It did have some sapwood on it. I'm able to work with that. But by configuring the way these align with each other, it's very important. I want that chest, the staves to all sort of blend together and be somewhat continuous in the way the grain flows through them. So this actually turns out to be the best way to orient them. I do have a little bit of sapwood on the underside of this particular board. That's going to be the underside of the stave. I have a little sapwood back here, which I'm actually going to cut away to some degree to try and create a straighter line back there. It's going to be a tapering wedge. And then no sapwood on the front of this, which would be good. So I get 5 out of this, 4 out of this one and 3 out of this one very comfortably, and even if I cut away some of the sapwood. And that's going to give me enough for my staves, but I have to be very, very careful about that. So the next step is to mill this to the thickness of the stave, which is roughly about 5/8 of an inch. And then I have to start doing the bevels and various things, which I'll talk about. So here's a mock-up I made, mostly to show you, and also to try to figure out the way this is going to be put together. And I started to fit the different staves. So here's number 1. It goes in. It's got a little bit of a haunch. It gets cut back some, so that fits in. Okay? And on the end of it is a bevel. It's not very much. It shows up in the drawing what that is. I don't know what it is. It's a few degrees. So I've got a bevel on the end of this that's got to fit. This is the bevel gauge. And then number 2 is fit. It goes in and it fits against number 1, and the bevels fit nice and tightly. Okay, and this is the reveal that I've got along the front. I'm going to change that a little bit, as you'll see. And then number 3 goes in. Every single time what I'm doing is getting them to the right width so they end up on my tick marks. At the same time, I've got a nice tight fit with the shoulders, and the tenon keeps them from rolling. And here's number 4. And that's as far as I got, because I was going to save the rest for you. And every single time I'm using the same angle, always the same angle on the end of this, since it is an arc of a circle. I didn't intend it to be an arc of a circle, but it turned out to be an arc of a circle. Now, what I also learned from this mock-up is these are not fit. I don't need to fit them anymore. But what I learned from my mock-up is, by the way, that angle is 3 degrees. This bevel angle is 3 degrees. I needed to find that. I got it off the drawing. I'll show you why that's important. So they're fit in, they're tight, they fit nicely each other to the bevels. But now I want to refine them a little bit. And what I've tried to do there is I've tried to actually make them slightly curved. This might or might not show up, this last stave. It's more curved than the bedboard ends. One of the nice things about doing a mock-up is you can experiment with your pieces, and if something doesn't work, then you don't risk the whole project. So I told you I wanted to compass this particular stave. I don't know if you can see, but there's quite a bit of curve to this. And I made a pattern of that curve. And basically what I did is I ran a compass plane along the surface, could use a spoke shave, and I got a shape that I liked. Now notice that it's quite a bit more shaped than the arc of the breadboard ends. So through various means, which I'll show you, I shaped this and fit it, and I liked it. So how I did it is I drew some pencil lines along this edge and the corresponding other edge, and took that down with a block plane. Tried to fair that in as best I could. And then since I realized I'd have to use sandpaper and it was going to mess up the surface, I decided I'd make a scraper. So I made a scraper with essentially the arc. Now you have to remember, when you use a scraper, you're tipping it forward. So it had to fit the arc, not when it's resting on the wood. If you can see the light coming through there, you probably can't. But as canted forward. It has to be canted forward, and that's when it starts to cut. Gets rocked up on that edge. And I made this little scraper just with a file, and it actually fares this really nicely. And it leaves the surface off of the scraper, but it's better than using sandpaper, and it's much more, it's a cleaner and more accurate job than just using a plane. And the nice thing about this too is these staves being about 5/8 of an inch thick, they're thinner now because I've shaped that edge. You're not going to know if I have to take a little bit extra off the back side on one or one edge, one side of one stave, or take a little bit more off the top of another stave, just so they all fit together. That's the most important thing. And if it's a 32nd of an inch thinner somewhere along the line, who cares? So the next step now is to mill my materials, cut all my tenons, lay them all out obviously, cut my tenons. I'm going to leave them all a little oversized, so I'm going to plane them down to the actual width that we want. Remember, with this perfect bevel on both sides. Okay, it's got to be perfect because the two pieces have to mate, and they're all the same, which is nice. And get the material milled, get the tenons done, get them all fit well, and then I can go about doing the shaping. So I've continued working on the mock-up. One of the questions I had was, what's the joint between them going to look like? I have this curve on each one of these. How's it going to fare into the one next to it? So I told you already that I can change these a small amount by planing one a tad bit thinner right at the joint, but I want them to line up nicely. So I've shaped the last 3 staves here, and you can see how they go together pretty nicely. They need a little more shaping, but that's what they are so far. So again, this mock-up is helping me with a lot of different aspects of the design of this, which is quite important. But now I have a sense of the width of the staves, how they're going to join together. What I've decided to do is just have a small chamfer on the adjacent sides. I also mocked up the splines to see what was going to happen with those, how big they were, where they're going to be placed. And overall, this is very stiff. They're very well joined. They're not going to rotate at all, which is what I was worried about. And what I learned from this mock-up is that I can make the staves a little bit thinner. So I went and I milled all the staves. Got them all here in order. They're just a tad under 5/8 of an inch. And if you notice, all the way along in the process, I have kept number 7 here and upper surface all marked right from the day I cut them. Number 4, upper surface. So I was able to keep track of them in the rough boards all the way through to here. They look nice the way they flow together. They really are all matched pretty well in terms of the grain and that kind of thing. Okay, so the next step is to go and cut them all exactly to the same length. Now, how long is that? Well, it's the length between the breadboard ends, which what I call shoulder to shoulder, how far they spread apart. In other words, what's the overhang on the two ends? That's what I'm going to be gauging right now. Maybe it's going to be about 1/2 inch, something like that. And then I need to know how far between them, that's shoulder to shoulder, like I said, and then add 2 inches for the 2 tenons on both ends. Now, some are only going to be 3/8 of an inch, but I want to have everything regular at this stage. So when I cut all identical tenons on all pieces identical length, my shoulders will all be nice and tight when I clamp this thing together. And I can easily cut the tenons back to 3/8 by hand when I get there. Okay, so that's the next step. Cut them all exactly to the same length. So where I am is I've cut all the staves, exactly the same tenon. I talked about that on both ends. One side is beveled and polished. Why is that? Well, that establishes one long edge of each stave. Then I can cut it to width and know that I'm not going to be adjusting both sides. So I'm getting also nice straight edges here. So I've been working on this one, stave number 4. This is the middle stave. And I fit these together. I got the width rather, to line up with my tick mark. I took this back. I used the table saw, ripped it at 3 degrees, and then used my long number 7 plane to plane it. I'll show you that when I get there. And it's very easy to get these mixed up. I've got left on here and right up here, and they're all marked 7 through 1. And this isn't quite, well, there it goes. It fits in. And is it over as far as it needs to go? No, I need to come up a little bit more. So I've got to adjust this joint just a small amount. It's tight on the back. Actually, it looks pretty good. So I'm rounding the tenons with a little rasp. That's a really good way to do it. Why am I rounding them? Because I don't want to decrease any of the strength of the breadboard ends by cutting sharp square corners to each mortise, which we've talked about. This tenon really is just to hold the stave in place from twisting and that kind of thing. And the splines also lock everything together so that it's much tighter. It's also very easy to get these confused inside and out. So one of the things I'm discovering right away when I'm doing this, and I saw this in the mock-up, is these aren't lining up perfectly. So I'll take a plane shaving or 2 off of this till they line up perfectly, and then I'll start to shape them to each other. They're lining up nicely with the tangent of the breadboard ends, but they're not aligning perfectly with each other. It's interesting, it's the same error on every single one of them.